Well, joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks for joining me. I want to talk about the government shutdown in a moment, but before we do that, I do want to get your thoughts on this latest trip of Donald Trump through North Asia. You were, of course, there on that famous delegation when Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. No such meeting this time, but what do you make of the deal that he seems to have cut with Xi Jinping to avert a trade war? Is this peace in our time, or is it more worryingly peace in our time?
Yeah, James, I got to tell you, I was watching the events this week, just expecting him to sort of magically show up at the DMZ again, just like he did back in 2019. Disappointingly, it didn't happen. I'm sort of looking at the deal. I guess if that's the word we can use for it, it's not really an agreement. It's certainly not a formal agreement. It's a détente. Essentially, what's going to happen is the Chinese have agreed not to put limitations on rare earths for the next year. We've agreed to cut back on the tariffs for a period of time. It's sort of a détente. This is I encourage people to look at this sort of similarly to the way we looked at the relationship we had with the Soviet Union back during the Cold War. This is more of a cold peace. And there's now a détente, and they'll end up, trying to continue the conversation. And that's why I think there's tremendous value here. It's not peace in our time. It's not the end of the discussion, but at least it's the beginning of the discussion. And it sounds like things are moving in the right direction. It's always important, James, always important when you've got two leaders like this, that if one of them picks up the phone to call the other one answers the phone. And I think they reaffirmed here on this visit that would happen, that if Trump needs to talk to Xi or vice versa, the communications will continue. I think that's unambiguously a good thing.
That's absolutely a good thing. And it's when there's not communication that real crises can occur. But you've got two very different systems here, and both want to be the dominant superpower. Is this pushing down the road some sort of eventual conflict, or do you think it will just, I know it's a long way to sort of be projecting, but are we looking at decades of kind of hotter and colder Cold War with China, just as we did in the 20th century, see that with the Soviet Union?
There's a school of thought here on the right, especially, that says or believes or at least argues that military confrontation with China is inevitable in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I don't buy it. One of the reasons I sort of like the détente, and I consider it to be a huge success, is that it starts to buy the time to figure out a way to get along, to figure out a way to sort of allow the Chinese to pursue their national interests, allow us to pursue ours without negatively impacting our friends in the larger, say, global economy, global stability, et cetera. Keep in mind, China has become very, very wealthy very, very fast. It is a communist nation, so it doesn't function the way that Australia and the U.S. does. It's not in that first tier of nations. How often have we talked about this? Can you imagine what the world would have said if Australia had kept information about COVID so private like the Chinese did? It would never happen in a democracy. It doesn't happen in first-tier countries, and China's not there yet. But maybe this and other things over the course of the next years, they can get there. So, look, anytime you can put off a trade war, it's a good thing. But anybody who can predict the future is probably just rolling the dice.
Yeah, no, trade wars as well as hot wars. Hey, tell you also who is not getting along right now. It's the Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. I spoke at the start of the show about the government shutdown here. Sectors around the country are feeling the effects, but now we're seeing the air traffic controllers and other aviation workers apparently being fed by airlines after not receiving their paychecks. Tell us how the politics of this are playing out, because, of course, they need 60 votes in the Senate, and the Republicans do not have those to keep the money moving here. At what point are the Democrats going to say this is hurting us more than it's hurting the Republicans?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, because right now both sides think they are winning, and that is a formula for a continued shutdown. Just like the war in Ukraine, you're not going to get people to come to the table until they feel like they get a better deal at the table than they get in the field. Right now, both parties feel like they are getting a better deal in the field, and they are winning the battle politically. I don't see it ending anytime soon. I think if you watch the pressure points, airlines is one of them. Air travel, we're coming up on our Thanksgiving holiday here in about 3 weeks, one of the heaviest travel periods of the entire year. Many of the airlines today came out vocally in support of a clean funding deal. Many of the airline unions which tend to lean Democratic, came out in favor of opening the government along the lines that Republicans have suggested already. So those pressure points will continue to boil. There's pressure points on things like healthcare subsidies and premiums. There's pressure points on food stamps and so other nutrition assistance programs. A lot of different pressure points, but none of them have added up yet to convincing either of the parties to go to the table. So my guess is when you and I talk next week, the government may well still be closed.
Well, yeah, that's not great news there if that's the case here. But one of the things that I'm sort of interested in is the polls. The polls seem to be indicating that it's not hurting Republicans in the way that previous government shutdowns that, I've spoken about, we've spoken about, and that I've lived through and watched have in the past. Are Americans becoming a bit savvier to the way congressional systems work, and that just because, somebody like a Gavin Newsom comes out and says, oh, well, they've got control, well, it doesn't mean that they've got a parliamentary control in the same way, that it might somewhere else?
Yeah, I think people just realize, who's responsible for Obamacare. We tried to shut down the government and did shut down the government in 2013 because we didn't want to fund Obamacare. And people say, someone's not funding Obamacare, that's a Republican. In 2019, we shut the government down over border security. And people are thinking, well, I know who's for border security, that's Republicans. And now we're shut down over wanting to spend more money on Obamacare. And everybody knows who wants to do that. That's the Democrats. So even if you don't follow politics very closely in this country, you sort of know who's on the side of spending more money on Obamacare, which is what's really at the heart of this particular shutdown. So, yeah, I think people are sort of waking up. They understand, a little bit about how Senate works. Not a lot. The filibuster is probably not something that the ordinary American understands. But if you ask them what party, wants to spend money on health care, that's going to be the Democrats.
Yeah, so the filibuster is a bit like the infield fly rule of politics. Hey, speaking of Trump, too, also, we spoke a bit about this last week here, about this idea of the third term. Well, he recently poured cold water on the idea, and this is what the president had to say.
I have my highest poll numbers that I've ever had. And, based on what I read, I guess I'm not allowed to run. So we'll see what happens.
John just says you're trolling when you talk about a third term.
Well, I don't think he said that. I don't think he'd use that term. But it's a very interesting thing. I have the best numbers for any president in many years, any president. And I would say that if you read it, it's pretty clear. I'm not allowed to run. It's too bad. I've been stupid, sir. But we have a lot of great people.
It's fascinating to me, though, that even though he seems to pour cold water on it, Donald Trump just loves to troll people with the idea that, I might go outside the law, and then does it. And every single time it seems like the left and the media and the Democrats jump right at the bait.
It's catnip for them. They cannot turn it down, and he plays it to a T. My favorite sort of part of this subtext, this conversation about a third term, is when he called Chuck Schumer, the head Republican in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries, the leading, Democrat in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat in the House, into the Oval Office to talk about the shutdown. And he had a Trump 2028 hat on the desk as they walked in. He does this on purpose, and it works masterfully. So, look, you know the name Mark Levin. He's a leading conservative voice in media here. And he posted something on Twitter just the other day and said, look, the man's not running. He's telling you he's not running. Let's move on to the next topic. When somebody like Mark Levin is telling you that, it means that everybody pretty much has assumed on the right that he's not running again because he can't. And as you heard in that clip, even he knows that the Constitution prevents that from happening.
Absolutely right. Hey, finally, before I let you go, speaking of things that are and are not allowed, we've had a report into the autopen scandal here, arguing that any executive action signed by autopen without written proof of Biden's approval should be voided. And that's the House Oversight Committee saying that. And the House Attorney General Pam Bondi has also announced that her office is reviewing the use of the autopen. Look, we've spoken about this before. We don't really know who was running the show there. Is there anything that's ever going to come of this, or is this just going to be another big asterisk against the Biden presidency in the record books?
Yeah, as critical as I have been and will continue to be of Biden's presidency and also his mental ability, his capabilities while he was president, don't think he should ever run for re-election. You and I have talked about that many, many times. I don't think there's going to be much that the Republicans can do about the auto pen. The former President Biden didn't put out a statement this week, for example. It said that he approved all of the pardons. Unless you have evidence otherwise, I'm not sure how you overcome that. And while the Republicans have circumstantial evidence that says, well, Joe Biden didn't meet with his staff very often, or at least as often as other presidents, that doesn't mean anything. So I don't know if the Republicans are ever going to find the hard evidence that they need in order to establish that the use of the auto pen was unauthorized and therefore void ab initio.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think I'll always have my suspicions, though, about that, as you may well as well.
James, as you well should.
And when we talk about Biden putting out a statement, we wonder how much time he actually spent crafting it. Mick Mulvaney, thanks so much for your time, as always.